share screen. I get host disabled attendee screen sharing. So I don't know if I need to
I will make sure that you're
yeah.
You should be okay now.
Okay, hang on. Oh, when you can see the screen sharing. Phew. Okay, right. Okay, do you want me to get going then?
Okay, you're all set.
Okay, thanks. Well, I'm just getting a message saying my internet connection is unstable. What more could go wrong? Okay, today we're going to talk about HF propagation, and we're going to look at, first of all, we're going to look at the current state of the sunspot cycle, and then we're going to look at some of the tools that are available for propagation predictions, in particular online tools. I mean, in the past, we've used things like VOACAP and other VOACAP-derived programs to produce calculations for propagation. But nowadays, we're tending to move more towards more online tools like ITU-RHF prop and VOACAP online to do the same thing. But we'll start anyway by looking at the sunspot cycle. Says he, pressing the wrong button. That's a good one. Whoops, there we go. So this is the current sunspot progression. And as you can see, we are right at the bottom of the cycle there in late 2020 now. I think this is probably a couple of months old now, but it really makes no difference. We are right at the very, very bottom. And you can see the previous cycle there had a double peak, which is characteristic of most cycles. Most cycles have a double peak. But it does look as though things should about to kick off any minute now. We've had a solar flux index of around about 68 to 70 for a while now. I mean, we've had some sunspots appear recently, then vanish again. And in fact, there was one report I read the other day that one group had said that they thought we would hit sunspot minimum around about December 2019. I don't think that's true. I think we are right in the middle of minimum now, and we should start to see things pick up, maybe from October, maybe from January 2021. And this is another plot of 400 years of sunspot observations, because a number of people have said, you know, are we heading for another Maunder minimum? And there's no real evidence that we are at the moment. If you look at that Maunder minimum in the 1600s to 1700, I mean, the trouble is that I think some of the data there is not terribly good. I think some of it is a bit vague, but you can see that there were sunspots, quite high sunspots before the Maunder minimum, and then it just died immediately. With the Dalton minimum in the 1800s, again, you can see that there were sunspots before 1800, and then it seemed to go down very, very quickly indeed. So it's not fair to say, oh, well, we've had a couple of reasonable cycles and therefore we will have another reasonable cycle. It doesn't necessarily work that way. But as we'll see in a minute, it does sound as though things are going to not be too bad on the next cycle. This is another graph that shows you the sunspots that have appeared in the, it's called a butterfly diagram, sunspots that appeared in the northern hemisphere of the sun and the southern hemisphere of the sun. And you can see that they all start at fairly high latitudes on the sun. And then as the cycle progresses, they move more towards the equator. And this is usual. And this is one of the ways we can tell whether a sunspot is part of the new cycle or the old cycle. New sunspot cycle spots tend to appear at high latitude on the sun. They also have a reverse negative polarity, a different They have a different magnetic polarity signature than sunspot cycle 24 spots. And we have seen quite a few sunspot cycle 25 spots recently. Of course, at the moment, everything's died out again. And I have no doubt whatsoever, over the next 3 months, we'll see an upturn and we'll start to see sunspots appearing again. Is the audio okay, by the way?
You're okay for the most part. Occasionally you're getting a little stutter in it, but most part you're fine.
Okay, that's fine. Right. So the consensus is, in this sort of sum this up, the consensus is we're not dipping into another Maunder minimum. I think that this is a group met in the States recently, and this is the decision they came up with. The current weaker magnetic field strength of the sunspots at the moment, or lack of sunspots, also means we're getting higher cosmic ray flux through the minimum phase, which does enhance radio propagation slightly. The cycle is slower, with lower luminosity and lower activity at maximum, consistent with a downward trend. So I think we are seeing a downward trend since the peak of cycle 22. And currently, as I said, minimum is predicted somewhere between June and October 2020. Sorry to be so vague. It's very hard to know when you're at a minimum until you've gone past it. And the prediction is that cycle 25 may be similar to the last cycle, 24. That is not outstanding, but certainly not a Maunder minimum. There was one report recently of one group who said that we were going to have a fantastic cycle 25. And I'd like to talk to them in about 6 years' time and see if they still agree. My own theory, and this is based on reading other people's work really, is that I would imagine that we will have a similar cycle to 24, not outstanding, but not terrible either. But there's a higher probability of extreme events during weaker cycles. By extreme events, I mean such events as solar flares, coronal holes, coronal mass ejections even. So this is really what we are seeing today on the sun. That's the sun on the left, photographed in extreme. We'll be seeing the sun on the right with way more activity. And I think with QRP operations especially, it does help if you've got some sunspots. I'm not saying that QRP operation without sunspots isn't possible, but if you want to get on the higher bands, such as 28 megs, it does help if you've got a few spots. And the other thing that we've had recently is solar wind from coronal holes. And they've been a dominant disruptor of HF propagation recently. And we had one recently that the solar wind hit, and it knocked the MUF down from up to sort of 18 megs down to 14 megs or 10. It can cause pre-roll enhancements. There is evidence that you get pre-roll enhancements with this sort of event. But on the whole, I think solar matter coming from coronal holes does tend to deplete the ionosphere and reduce MUFs rather than improve things. And one way of looking at this is if you go to solarham.com, and if you look at the image where I've put an arrow to it there, that's the coronal hole view. That's the view of the sun in extreme ultraviolet. If you click on that, then you can get an instant view of what the coronal holes are at this moment in time. And this is what the view would look like. If you're interested, it's the Solar Dynamics Observatory AIA211 camera or imager that we're looking at there. And the sun rotates from left to right. So as I've said, or you can see in the red arrow there, these coronal holes, which are areas on the sun with reduced magnetic fields or open magnetic fields. They appear darker because they're slightly cooler, but it's these open magnetic fields that let the plasma fly out from the sun, and is what has been causing some of the disruption we've got. So these coronal holes rotate left to right, and the one that you can see there marked 64, I would say that would be another day before it gets central to the sun. It's on the equator, so it's going to be permanently or pretty much Earth-centric. And from there, it takes about 2 days for the matter to hit the Earth. We'll show you that in a minute. So here's a calculation. So if we're 149.6 million kilometers from the sun, and the speed of the solar wind is somewhere between 400 and 800 kilometers a second, if we do the calculations, you see it takes 2.1 to 4.3 days for this solar matter to hit the Earth. And this is another issue with trying to work out what propagation is doing with coronal holes. and the solar wind is we don't really know how fast the solar wind is until it hits a detector on one of the satellites or spacecraft. So we have to kind of guess. So I normally guess about 2 days, but it could be slower. It's not particularly fast solar wind. And you can get solar winds that are much faster. So it could be less than 2 days. So this is always a little bit of a vague way of working out what's going on. And the impact of the solar wind on the Earth's magnetic field is it distorts it very badly. And for this, we measure the KP index, that's the planetary index. And if you look at the K indices, you'll see that you've got Boulder, Colorado, Fredericksburg, College, Alaska, I think is in that chart. But the one you want to look for is the estimated planetary KP index, rather than just one of the individual K indices. And this is an averaged index for the whole planet. But that's the one we tend to use. Now, talking of other tools, we use ionosondes to work out what the critical frequency is with propagation. Critical frequency is a frequency at which a radio wave is sent straight up and then it's reflected and comes back down again. And anything above that frequency, the radio wave will go straight out into space. Anything below that frequency, hopefully it will be returned. This is the plot from the Chilton ionosonde, Chilton in Oxfordshire. Not Chilton as in the Chilton Hills in Bedfordshire, just in case anyone was wondering. I made that mistake first off. But this is at the Rutherford Appleton Laboratory. It's a Chilton ionosonde. And this is a typical plot that we get from that. And from this, we can deduce a number of things. It's showing us that the FOF2, or the critical frequency of the F2 layer, is 5.425 megahertz. So on this particular day, 5 meg signals might be, short skip signals might be relayed back from the ionosphere, but 7 meg signals will go straight through. And in fact, if we look at the bottom, just up from the bottom line there, we get a measure of what the maximum usable frequency is for various distances. So you can see over 3,000 kilometers there, the MUF on that particular day was 19.2 megahertz. But come down to 500 or 600 kilometers, it's 6.9 megahertz. So this is a very quick and easy way of looking at an ionosonde plot and working out what we'll be able to do. But there is one small problem with this. This is what is happening at Chilton. It's not what's happening midpoint between you and the station you're trying to work. So it is only a guide. It doesn't tell you all of what's going on, but it is a useful guide. And I think the trouble is with ionosonde plots is to uninitiated, if you've never seen one before, they're a little bit difficult to read. So what we did, I was talking some time ago with Jim Bacon, G0KYA, and he came up with the idea of taking this information and plotting it in a different way. And he came up with propquest.co.uk. And what it does is it takes the information from the Chilton ionosonde, or you can click and select the Fairford ionosonde or the Daub ionosonde, and it plots it in I think it's 15-minute increments. So you can see from this plot here, which was in August, that the FOF2, the red plot there, is around about 5 megahertz. But you can see that over 3,000 kilometers, the upper plot there, it goes from at night time, it's below 10 megahertz, rises up through 14 and 18 megahertz until after sunset, and then it goes down again. So this is a much easier way of quickly looking at what the MUF is. Now, one thing I would say here is that it's, again, not entirely accurate. So if you're trying to work somebody, say in South Africa, this is what's happening above your head. It's not what's happening midpoint. And there are not enough ionosondes or digisondes around the world to give us all the information we need. But it's you know, it's a guide anyway. And we've spotted a few things with the ionosondes that are quite interesting. You'll see that just before sunrise, you see that dip. There's a dip in the MUF, and then it rises quite quickly as soon as the sun comes up. We see that quite a lot. But in this instance, you also see that the MUF continues to rise after sunset. It rises up to 18 megahertz just after sunset. And so this is a good way of working out if it's worthwhile staying on the band once the sun sets. And also, are there any anomalies in there that, that we can spot? You'll see that the lower estimate also is the FOES, that's the sporadic E FO or critical frequency as well, which is quite useful. So this was, PropQuest was a way of taking information from ionosondes that was a little bit difficult to read and making them more useful. And what we found in the UK, and this is very UK centric, although and Daub, I think it's in France or Belgium, I can't remember now. We've added that as well, because sometimes the data isn't always available from Fairford or Chilton, and so you can click on whichever one is you want. And I don't see any reason why we couldn't add more digisondes or ionosondes to this around the world if need be. I mean, it's quite an easy job to add one to it. We'll have to talk to Jim Bacon, G0KYA, as to whether that could be done. But that's propquest.co.uk, which has been around now a couple of years, but it's been invaluable. It's also very good for working out frequencies for local nets. So if you're on 80 meters, if you have a net that's either on 80 or 40, you can soon look at this and see whether it's going to be sufficient. The frequency is going to be sufficient for your net around your locality. And we used to use these, or you still use these every year in the 80-meter club championship, which is an RSGB contest that we run. And we can soon see that, you know, whether 80 meters is going to support propagation or whether it goes long. I mean, it's not going to support propagation within a kind of 100-mile range, which is what we really need. Now, Jim's added something else to this recently, which is another graph which just looks at the F2 critical frequency, but also he's added in the FXL spread F index as well. Without getting too technical, when a radio wave goes through the ionosphere, it gets split. And we have what is known as the ordinary wave and the extraordinary wave. Now, the extraordinary wave is usually a little bit higher in frequency. So you sometimes find that you can get a signal return from the ionosphere, which is above the MUF, but below the FOF2 MUF. But it's above that, but it's not quite as high as the critical frequency of the extraordinary wave. So some people were commenting on this, and now he's just added a new graph there on the NVIS tab of PropQuest that shows you all of them. So we've got the FOES, so that's the critical frequency of the sporadic E layer, and we've got the FXL, which is the extraordinary wave. And you can see from that just, I think it's 4 o'clock, you can see that 3.5 megs was still in use for near vertical instance skywave, but some of it may have been coming from the extraordinary wave as well. The split in energy coming back from both the ordinary wave and the extraordinary wave is not quite 50-50, but we'll think of it in those terms. But it does show you that when you're considering maximum usable frequencies on NVIS communications, you've got to consider both as well, both the ordinary and the extraordinary wave. If that sounds too much like gobbledygook, just don't worry too much, just go for the FOF2. But as you can see there, at the moment, and this is pretty common every day, what you find is that 80 meters, 80 meters or 3.5 megs can be used for near vertical incidence skywave communications, but certainly 40 meters can't, and even 60 meters at times does struggle a little bit. But that will improve as we get more sunspots, and you'll find eventually that 40 meters, 7 megs can be used for NVIS local communications as well. Now, the other thing on PropQuest is sporadic maps. I mean, Jim is a professional meteorologist and has done a lot of work on looking at wind shear and the effects of the jet stream on wind shear. And I think sporadic E is, we understand it a little bit better than we did, but it's still not as clear cut as it could be. I mean, it's multifactorial, absolutely. Sometimes it has been linked to thunderstorms, but other times you'll find sporadic when there's absolutely no thunderstorms whatsoever. But what we can say for certain is that the season in Europe anyway, in the Northern Hemisphere, is May to the end of August. It was just ended. And by looking as to where the 300 millibar jet stream goes, if it goes over mountain ranges, we get what is known as gravity waves, which is nothing to do whatsoever with the quantum effects you get from, they're trying to measure the spacecraft. It's quite simple. If you think of a wind going over a mountain range, it gets deflected upwards as it goes over the mountain, and that can compress the meteor material in the upper atmosphere, or the E layer, to cause some sort of dense patches of ionization. So the idea of wind shear is that if it can be helped by a jet stream going over a mountain range, then yes, it will. So we need to know where this jet stream is, and is it going over mountain ranges such as the Pyrenees or the Alps in Europe anyway, and see what it does. But the only problem with this was that we didn't feel these maps were terribly clear. And Jim worked with the programmer. Jim worked for a company, owned a company actually, called WeatherQuest in Norwich, and they've got a very good programmer there called Dan Holly, and they worked together to produce PropQuest. But he's been working on something else recently called the EPI, or Sporadic E Probability Index, and I just want to show you that now. This is the EPI that has been introduced. It's probably a little bit late in the season now for this. I mean, the sporadic E is dying off. You might get a little bit on 10 meters now, but I think come the next season, this could be quite useful. They just wanted to get it just in for the last element of the season, just to see whether it worked or not. And this shows you the probability of being able to work various parts of Europe on sporadic E on a kind of hour by hour basis. So we'll be talking more about this, I think, in Radcom over the coming months. We'll try and get a feature written, but get ready for the next sporadic E season, which is next April, late April into May, because I think this will be very, very useful indeed for working out where you can work and where you can't. And just to show you the incidence of sporadic E, this is some work I did some time ago, 6 years ago actually, which was looking at sporadic E on 6 meters. And basically this is the number of spots that were received from the ER16 beacon that was received at DKA-NE. And you can see there that there's no sporadic E there until late, is it May, I think? Yeah, May. And then it ramps up completely. And so May is very, very active for sporadic E on 6. June is also very active, July, and then it tails off. So there's only a few little tracks there in August. So there we go. So you can see that the sporadic E season really does get going in May. And May and June, probably the best 2 months in Europe anyway. And then it will tail off as it goes. So from a QRP point of view, I think sporadic E on the higher bands on 10 megs, sorry, 28 megs and 6 meters is very good. I think you can work the world, well, not work the world, but work most of Europe on sporadic E when conditions are very, very good. And with the lack of sunspots at the moment, sporadic E is probably one of the main modes that you can use in that particular time. Now, what other tools have we got available to us? Well, if we look at these modes and how much you need in terms of being able to use them, SSB is top of the pole there at 10 dB signal to noise ratio required. CW is somewhere between 0 and minus 15 dB signal to noise. I've put brilliant operator there. If you can work people on CW at minus 15, you're probably better than I am, but it can be done. RTTY, about minus 5 dB, and then we get into the weak signal modes like PSK 31, 63, down to minus 10 dB, and then the even weaker signal modes like FT4, FT8, JT 65, and Whisper. Whisper there down to minus 31 dB SNR, and I think you're talking about FT4 and FT8 tomorrow, aren't you? So that will be useful. But
Yes,
it does show that if you, sorry?
That'll be tomorrow afternoon.
Okay. Okay, that's good. But you'll find that FT4 and FT8 are, well, they're probably, in Europe at least, they are becoming more dominant as modes. There have been a lot of complaints that people go on CW and can't work anyone, but they're being picked up on reverse beacons. But FT4 and FT8, there always seems to be activity now. So I think it's a case of you can moan about it, or you can just go where the DX is and work it. But it just shows you what maybe 5 years has done in terms of the modes that are available and what you can work with them. But so I suppose the point to make is, in terms of propagation, is if you're on QRP, don't ignore these weak signal modes, whatever you do, because you stand more chance of working stuff with 5 watts or less on these modes than perhaps SSB and CW. I remember when I first got involved in QRP, I was very disappointed with SSB that I could call until I was blue in the face, and really couldn't work much at all. It wasn't until I discovered that more CW was way better, and you know, things started to improve dramatically. Then we had PSK 31, but now we've got the other modes in there as well. It's opened up a whole new ball game. And I just show you this picture just as a kind of a laugh, really. This is the Propagation Studies Committee stand we had at the Newark Hamfest last year. And Peter, G0KYA, has recently joined the Propagation Studies Committee. And he said, oh, he said, and I said, you're having a laugh, aren't you? It's basically, you're in a Faraday cage. It's a metal building. I said, you're not going to work anything. And he said, what I'd like to try. So on top of that stand, he put I think it was about a 4-foot little loaded vertical for 20 meters. And he hooked it up. And I said, you won't work anything. And he proved me wrong, because this is where we worked. This was, I think it was 5 watts on 20 meters. And we got as far as Florida, I think it was Florida or Texas, one or the other, and right up to the Arctic Circle, into Iceland as well. So it showed me up, really. It just showed you what you can do. But that was a pathetic little aerial, really, that wasn't doing anything, and it was with a very short aerial in a metal hangar, basically, at Newark. So you can work tremendous stuff with modes that can support it. Now, other tools that are available, cluster and reverse beacon network, absolutely. The cluster is very useful for seeing who's on where, but the trouble with the cluster is it is a manual technique where people have to log that they're actually working, where the reverse beacon network is automated. And you know, if you put out a 5-watt CW signal on any band, actually 20 meters probably, and then see where you're picked up, you get a shock, you get a real surprise, and you'd be picked up all over the place and not even realize it. And it's a problem with our hobby at the moment, that you can put out calls on CW and nobody comes back to you. But there is you do get a little sense of success when you are being picked up on the reverse beacon network. So it's certainly worth a tool that's worth looking at. And so 5 watts into the reverse beacon network, and you will get returns from all over the place. So it's a nice tool to use. Other tools available, ClubLog is a good one. The thing about propagation predictions is that it's okay, the theory of what you can work and when, but ClubLog works on who's actually worked when, or who's actually worked where and when they did it. And it's basically a report of real conditions. So this is a log of contacts from UK to Alaska KL7 in October from ClubLog. So you can see when people have actually made contacts. So there's no propagation prediction in this. This is, you know, hard contacts, you know, when have they been made? So if you want to make, I mean, I did this because I need Alaska for my worked all states, and I think it's going to be a while before I get it, actually. But you could see from this that 30 meters at around about 1800, 1900 UTC would be a good time, as would 1900 on 40 meters, but with 30 QSOs being logged there. But club log's a great way of checking propagation paths and times. And it's based on real live contacts, not predictions or just real live contacts on what people have worked and when they've done it. PSK Reporter is another good tool. It can work with a number of modes. This is with FT8. So if you want to know the best times to work a particular area, I've used this for stateside stuff to see when paths to Seattle and Washington were actually open on FT8. And again, it's based on real live contacts, not predictions. So it's a very useful tool to use. And as I said, I think 10 years ago, we didn't have any of these things. So, you know, Club Log, PSK Reporter, Reverse Beacon Network, they just didn't really exist as such. So we're in a good time now. Now, let's get back to more traditional propagation predictions. We have Radcom in the UK. Radcom is our monthly magazine, and we've always had propagation predictions in there, FLAIR propagation predictions. Gwyn produces them. They're produced using the program ITURHF prop. This is a bit of a mouthful, but it's kind of a, how could I put it, a competitor to VOACAP. It's a more modern program that was produced by the ITU, and he uses them to produce these. The problem is when we're at very, very low sunspot numbers, it does look like 10 meters and 12 meters are dead as a doornail. But what he's done now is we've included letters. So on here, it gives you the signal strength. So, you know, 1 to 9 is an S meter reading. Now we've included letters, I think A to E or thereabouts, which are below the noise level numbers. So this has only just started about a month ago. So it can be more useful for programs like Whisper, like JT modes, FT8, FT4, for working out what paths are possible. But the problem with the Radcom predictions, I think Gwyn will be the first person to admit this, is that you can't please all the people all the time. They're based on 100 watts sideband to a dipole. And I used to get people write to me and say, look, I can do way better than this. And so what are you running? Well, we've got, you know, 400 watts to a stepper at 100 feet or whatever. Or other people were saying, look, I only use 10 watts and I've got a particularly bad antenna and I can't even, you know, work the ones here that are shown as 9. And so I've always had in the back of my mind that we needed to do something else that was more tunable. And with one page in Radcom, we really couldn't do that. So we had to go online to do it. And the first thing we did is approached Yari, OH6BG, and said, could you produce some HF charts for Radcom in a similar sort of vein to the ones that you've seen there, but make it so people can change the mode, change the power, and change the, have a look, see what I can do. And I kid you not, he turned this around in about 24 hours. So now we get charts like this. So these are the VOACAP Radcom charts. Looks at 28 locations around the world. 4 of the locations are given for short path and long path. We're generating hour by hour reliability predictions for each band. But the good news about this is this is more tuned to your particular station. So if you know you've got a really good station, you're running linear, you're running beams. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't use the word linear on QRP conference, should I? But if you know you're running a beam, at least you can tune it and you can say, yes, I am running a 4-element stepper at whatever. Or you can say, no, I've got a particularly bad station, and you will get a chart that is more suited to your station rather than just relying on the ones that we produced in Radcom. And so this is a very, very good way of actually getting a set of charts for the world. And it doesn't take long to produce. And and you can produce the charts for your station and keep them for the month. They last a month basically. You can set whatever, which is probably nil at the moment, I would imagine, and you can generate these charts. So that was the VOACAP version. And while we're talking about VOACAP.com, it's again, it's been put online now. Yari has helped produce that, and you can do point-to-point charts. So this is UK to New York, and you can do a number of charts. You can do charts like we've seen in I think it was Dom's presentation showed a VOACAP chart which showed the best times to work various or a particular location point to point. I do like these 24-hour charts, so you can see there that if you want to work New York on this particular day, you look for the hottest spot. So about 4:30 in the morning on 80 meters was probably optimum, and the highest band you could ever work them on, these are all probability charts really, is 17 meters, probably about 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, but you're about a 30% chance of working them. So VOACAP.com is a very useful chart now. I mean, years ago, we all used to have PC-based programs, and VOACAP was one of them. Some of them were not terribly useful. Some of them were better than others. VOAProp is a good one. ACE-HF, you have to pay for that one. But we're moving now more towards online programs. So you don't have to, you don't even have to have a PC. You could run it on a Chromebook. You can run it on an iPhone. You can just call the website up and call it the charts up. So I think they're very, very useful indeed. Now, that was VOACAP, and basically we took the output from that, and this other program that was produced was based on ITU-RHF prop. So it's a totally different ionospheric model. And the work was originally done by a programmer in Saudi Arabia. Oh, I'm trying to remember his name now. It's just gone for me for a second, but it'll come later. Oh, James, I think, yeah, James Whitaker, I think. Not sure, I'll have to check in a minute. But anyway, I went to James and said, look, this is what Yari's done with VOACAP. Can you do the same thing with ITU or HF prop? Because they do give slightly different results. So he said, yeah, sure. So this is what we have as well. It's called the PSK Radcom tool. And so it again, you can put in your power, you put in your antenna gain, and it will give you a set of charts for the 28 locations around the world with an estimate of the signal strength on them as well. So even though you're running QRP, this does show you the probability of being able to work something. For instance, if you're only using QRP, and these are based, I think I based this on 100 watts, but I would imagine that anything that shows a 9 there, or 8 or 9, you'd probably be able to work it on 5 watts QRP as well. So that's the PSK Radcom tool. There'll be a slide at the end that shows you the URLs for these, so you can get to them. But so we now have a tool that produces propagation predictions for 28 locations around the world, one RHF prop. So the PROPI tool is the ITU-RHF prop tool, and VOACAP online tool is also. And I'll show you the URLs when we get to the end. PredTest is also used the ITU-RHF prop engine. A little bit of a long story here, but Gwyn originally started work on producing the online version of the ITU-RHF prop, and it was James in Saudi Arabia who programmed it. Then they kind of forked, so James went and developed PredTest. So PredTest will let you do point-to-point calculations. It will let you do area calculations as well. And again, it's all online. You put in your frequency, the time, the month, what the R12 is, that's the smooth sunspot number, power and antenna gain, and you'll get a chart like this that shows you the likelihood of being able to work various parts of the world. Again, that's a nice tool to use, and it's very useful if you want to work at a specific location, to play with this tool backwards and forwards on time, just to see you can advance it very quickly in terms of working out the best time to work a particular country. And again, you can do point-to-point calculations. This is the UK, I think it's my location actually, to New York. And we've got, what you probably find with QRP contacts is that ultimate signal strength is in a way neither here nor there, because people are not going to be that strong. But as long as the signal to noise ratio is better than zero, you stand a good chance of hearing them. In this instance, you can see that if you want to work New York, somewhere between midday and 5 o'clock was best at probably maybe 17 meters, 18 megs, if not 20 meters. And then as the day goes on, or turns to evening, the MUF slides down the chart, and you suddenly find that 40 meters is more likely to work it. So you usually find that most contacts work on this sort of basis, where you have a chart that looks like this, with the MUF climbs up to a maximum around about midday, and then dives down again at night. So you could see that at night, probably 7 megs would still be open to New York till about 3 a.m. and then it will close, but 5 megs might be open as well. So I do like propagation charts, because, okay, they are probabilities of being able to work a particular place, but they're better than nothing. And I think it's better to have a fair idea what you're trying to achieve than just trying to shoot fish in a barrel, not knowing. For instance, if you wanted to work New York and you're on 20 meters, say, and it was in the morning, you wouldn't really stand much of a chance. So I'd rather know that before I try to do it. So it's better to have some charts. There's an example here of how you could use PredTest to do it. This was the California QSO party last October, and I was trying to work out the best times to work California from the UK. So this is Norfolk to California with 100 watts SSB into a dipole, I think it was. And as you can see, there is no likelihood of doing it. It's pretty nil on SSB. So we have to, I think if we're a QRP operator, we have to be a little bit canny and think, well, how can we tweak this to show a better probability of being able to work, a station. So if we wind it up to 100 watts CW, that shows you immediately that you can see there's a nice hotspot there now, around about 7 megs, about 6 or 7 in the morning with 100 watts CW. So, okay, it may mean therefore that 6 to 7 AM to work California on 7 megs would work on QRP as well. If you put just 5 watts CW into this, it probably wouldn't show anything, but by bump it up to 100 watts, it gives you a better idea of the times of for QRP contacts. And you'll see there was another little hump there, around about 1600 hours for 20 meters. So there's, you might just be able to do 20 meters around about 4 o'clock, but it's not going to be as good as 7 megs at 7 AM. And again, this is, if we put 100 watts and FTA into this, again, it just kind of confirms what we already found out from the previous chart, that again, 7 megs at 7 AM might just be able to do it. There's a little bit of an opening there, sort of 1 till 2 on 5 megs. And again, that 20 meter lump there at around about 1600 hours is well, I think, what have you got there? So reliability of about 20%. It's not a good path at 0 sunspots, but it does at least show you that if you wanted to work California, these are the best times to look. In fact, it shows you that it'd be pretty pointless looking at midday. There's no propagation at all to California in midday on any band from the UK. This one, Norfolk to California, long path. That's the other thing I think about contacts is, don't just do short path propagation predictions, do long path as well. And this shows you that there's a nice little opening, very short opening there, 3 o'clock 1500 hours from around about, well, probably 18 megs, 17 meters might just be able to do it. There's a very short opening on long path. It doesn't last very long, but you might just be able to do it at 5 watts CW. It's worth a try anyway. Now, other propagation considerations. Greyline conditions. Greyline is important. That is working stations along the terminator that separates night from day. You sometimes find that, especially when we get a few more sunspots, that as the terminator crosses a country, if we can work at right angles to the terminator, and you'll probably find those stations come up. For example, here you can see that the terminator is just about to hit India, and on a kind of sort of right angle to that is the UK. So I would imagine that signals on, say, 28 megs will actually peak. They will just come up just very shortly as the terminator crosses over India. It's called the Peterson ray. It's caused by high angle radiation, high angle radio waves that get bent by the terminator as it crosses. So this is not necessarily stations going up, and it's not working stations along the terminator, but using the terminator to work stations that are at right angles to it. So this is worthwhile. And this is a piece of software from mapmaker.com. It's totally free, and it works as a screensaver. So if you've got a PC, go to mapmaker.com and put this on as a screensaver, and it's quite a useful little tool. I say it's free. You can actually pay and have it sorted out for your particular station, but the free version works quite nicely as well. So there's a freebie for you, mapmaker.com. And just to show you the effects of sunrise, this is contacts with 3Y0X, Peter the First Island, which was a few years back now. I can't remember exactly when, 2006, I think. And these were contacts that were made on 80 meters from people in the UK. And you can see that the calculation that we've done here with W6EL prop shows you the most likely times. But all those contacts were made just on sunrise at 7 o'clock in the morning. So that shows you the importance of Greyline when you're trying to work DX. And we plotted or calculated for easterly and the stations west of me, G0TSM, G3BJ, G8SED, all west of me, and they all made contact just on sunrise, just at that point. And Greyline, the improvement in signal strength may only last a few minutes, if that. And as you go lower in frequency, sort of to 160 or 80 meters, that may literally be a minute or 2 minutes where it's possible. But I'd rather know that beforehand, so you can get on there to work the stations you need. I've worked VP8NO, I think it was, Falkland Islands, in a similar situation as the sun rose on 80 meters on QRP. But there we go. So just to really, we're nearly at the end now. So just to look at why is HF propagation so complex? Why is it so difficult to work out when things are going to be workable and when they're not? Well, I think this sums it up quite well. This was used in a presentation that I just grabbed hold of this. I thought this was fantastic. If you look at what's going on there, we've got the co-rotation, gravity waves, neutral wind, fountain effects, plasma, and we've got flux tubes, ion-driven winds. I'm not surprised that HF propagation is so complex. There's so much going on the Earth, on the magnetosphere, that makes it very, very complex indeed. So in summary then, just to talk about those tools again. So you've got, to make it easier, we've got them all rsgb.org/whatever. So rsgb.org got PropQuest, which is the NVIS chart, and will also give you the sporadic E propagation predictions. PredTest and Propy. PredTest is the ITURHF propagation prediction program, and PROPI is another ITURHF propagation program. Then we've got VOACAP, which is the RSGB's monthly 28 locations around the world program. And also I've got on my site, G0KYA, so rsgb.org/G0KYA, there's another VOACAP based program that shows you very quickly where you are likely to be able to work around the world on an hour-by-hour basis. I think that is kind of a summary of the latest developments in propagation prediction programs that are online anyway, and it saves you having to install software. And if you've got something like a Chromebook where you can't, then those URLs will work for you. So that's it for me.
Well, thank you, Steve. We have a few questions. Again, if you have additional questions, please go to the bottom of the Zoom box window and click on the Q&A and add your questions. The first question was, could you please define or talk about the terms solar flux index and pre-auroral enhancement?
Yeah, sure. I'm just trying to stop sharing my screen. There we go. That's better. Okay, solar flux index. The solar flux index is a measure of the strength of the 10.7 meter radio waves coming off the sun, and we use it as a proxy. Use it as an indicator of really solar activity. So it kind of correlates to sunspot numbers, but it's easier to measure. For example, it never really goes much below about 68 and can get up to 300. So by measuring the intensity of radio waves at 10.7 meters, that's 2,800 megahertz, I think 2.8 gigs. It's a good strong indicator of how much ionization the sun is able to cause. And you'll find that some charts use solar flux index and some charts use sunspot number. But the two are pretty much interchangeable. I'm cautious of saying that they correlate well. They don't correlate too well, but it is a measure. They're both measures of how active the sun is and how much ultraviolet is coming off the sun. I don't mean that the radio waves at 2.8 gigahertz are causing the ionization, but there's a correlation between the measure at 2.8 and the ultraviolet radiation coming off the sun. Right, so that's SFI. What was the other one? I've forgotten now.
Yes, pre-auroral enhancement.
Oh yeah, pre-auroral enhancement. When we have solar particles coming off the sun in the solar wind or in a coronal mass ejection, it's coming out as a vast cloud of plasma, really, coming at the Earth, probably somewhere in the region of 600 kilometers a second. That's not an hour, a second. This is probably a good reason why you don't want to be an astronaut out doing a spacewalk when there's a CME. But as this stuff hits the Earth, we sometimes find that it does cause an improvement in signals. Suddenly you find that the bands get a little bit livelier just as this stuff hits. What then happens is maybe half an hour later, the MUFs decline, and the bands tend to close down a bit if it's bad enough. If the KP index goes up to 5 or 6, yeah, you'd really do get a geomagnetic storm and things are closed down. But we notice that there is just this, not always, but sometimes, just as it hits, and we see that you can tell from the Solar Dynamics Observatory and other spacecraft that it is about to hit the Earth or is just hitting the Earth. But you do get this pre-auroral enhancement where MUFs go up before they then go down. I mean, for example, we had bad conditions last weekend, and the MUFs were down to around about 14 megs when they had been up to 18 megs. And that was all due to this incoming material coming off the sun.
Well, thank you very much. The next question is from Matt M0TEU, and he asked, "Hi Steve, which book would you recommend for describing atmospheric physics involving the propagation?" Now, in addition, we've already listed your book here in the chat. So,
oh right, okay. Well, there are not too many books around on radio propagation, unfortunately. I do know that Carl Lichtenschwab is currently working on an older book. He's updating it, and that was, I can't remember what it's called now. I've got a copy here. But it's a book on HF propagation, and he's updating it and bringing it up to the 21st century. And that will be available maybe in 6 months or so. But other than that, I think mine is probably the only one on the market at the moment. I feel awful saying that. I'm really not trying to push my book in particular, but I mean, I've got a range of books, but some of them are back in the 60s now.
Well, that's okay. Tristan has already put your link for your book in the chat here, so he's pushing your book.
Okay.
I guess you have the same suffix, but just scrambled around a little bit, so you're like call sign brothers.
Well, I must admit, I saw that call sign pop up on the screen earlier. I thought, oh, hang on, what's that? I thought it was me. But that's yeah. Thanks, Tristan. Yeah, I've seen your call sign on the, on forums before, and I thought that's quite odd, really. Yeah.
Our next question is from Bill, Golf Mike 4, Uniform Bravo Juliet. What's the most fruitful, a more intense FO F2 layer or a higher FO F2 layer?
Right. Okay. FOF2 layer. I mean, FOF2 is the frequency at which the critical frequency at which signals are reflected back from the F2 layer. So I think we can't really. I think if we should just use the term F2 layer. So what is more fruitful, a higher layer or a lower layer?
Or more intense?
And more intense. Well, the more intense the F2 layer, the better. Absolutely. More ionization. Time of year can make a big difference as well. As you'll probably notice, we're now coming out of the summer season, which is characterized by generally lower MUFs, higher MUFs at night, but lower MUFs during the day. And as we head towards late September into October, we'll find that MUFs start to increase, and we'll start to get transatlantic propagation on 20 meters and 17 meters again. So yes, you do want a more intense ionization in the F2 layer, absolutely. And one way of measuring it is to measure the critical frequency. That is what frequency or what radio waves are reflected straight back down. And the higher the MUF, the higher the higher the critical frequency. Generally, the higher the MUF is over longer distances.
Our next question is from Tristan, G0KYA. Why are long path and short path predictions looked at separately on pred test? Is there a benefit of long versus short path?
I think I wouldn't necessarily say there's a benefit, but what you find is they're not, that there are different times of the day. So if you look at short path propagation predictions and then look at long path, you'll probably find that they're not the same, that the timing is not the same at all. And what I'm saying, I guess, is that if you ignore long path, you're missing out on propagation paths. I mean, we find in the UK that Australia and New Zealand long path is probably more reliable. And I think it also depends where the path goes. If the path goes over water, it's likely to be more reliable than one that goes over land. So I think that's what I'm trying to say, is that just don't ignore it. But if you have to check them both, because they will appear at different times, and the propagation prediction programs can't basically produce both of them at the same time. You either have to do short path or long path, and that's why you do both of them.
Our next question is from Mike, G8AXA. Are you going to add anything about the 10-meter winter morning whisper test?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. This is something that I noticed. Basically, I was looking at whisper in the morning on 10 meters and was spotting that there were stations popping up in excess of 200 miles on 10 meters, and that I didn't really expect to see. And I proposed that we do some testing to look at that in the winter to see whether, I think it's probably due to tropospheric propagation, but I think with 10 meters especially, we don't normally associate 10 meters with tropospheric propagation, but when we're talking about very weak signals like whisper, like FT8, I think that suddenly there are paths there that we didn't really expect to see. So yes, I think I suggested that we did something in terms of a test I haven't actually written it up for Radcom yet. But I think I was talking about FT8, not Whisper. But yeah, I think we absolutely have a look. But I think that's what I was saying, is that there seem to be path openings probably in excess of 100 miles that we didn't expect to see on 10 meters with Whisper and FT8. And I'd like to have a closer look at them as to what's causing it. Probably some form of tropospheric propagation, but very much below the noise, absolutely.
I've seen the same phenomena here with F8 in the mornings on 10 meters with those short little bursts like that. So I've seen the same phenomena occur.
Yeah.
Our next question comes from, let's see, that's a thank you from Ian and from Rob and from Mike. A question: is there any good mailing list or websites or blogs, etc., that you can recommend?
I think that there is one group that is worth joining, and that's the HAMSci group. It's an American group. You may have already heard of this. HAMSci, a group of amateurs who work professionally in terms of propagation. And the HAMSci group do lots of fantastic work in terms of looking at propagation. They've got a number of projects on the go, and they have a forum which you can, I think it's a Google group actually, and there's all sorts on there. And the thing is, I think with propagation, it's always nice to have, if you've got a question, be able to pose that question and you get some professional answers. And I think I think it's probably the most active group at the moment. I mean, Propagation Studies Committee, we in the UK, we do have a group for members, not terribly active, and there is a section on the RSGB website where you can pose questions. But if you're really, really interested in propagation, HAMSci is probably the group to join. Absolutely.
And we've posted HAMSci in the chat, and I've also posted a link to my my website's propagation page, where I have a lot of these links collected. So those are both in the chat for everyone. The next question is from Mike Meadows, G4 Golf Uniform Golf. Have you used NCDXF beacons? I have used the Faro software since 2011.
Have I, or has he?
He's asked if you have.
I haven't used Pharos recently. I mean, just okay, for people who don't know, the NCDXF beacon chain is a worldwide beacon chain of beacons around the world that transmit automatically, and they start off, the CW beacons, they start off on 100 watts, then they get stepped down to 10 watts, then 1 watt, then 0.1 watt. So it's a very good, it means that you can listen to one frequency, 14.1 megs, for example, or 28.2. You can listen to all parts of the world completely in 3 minutes. Now, there's a piece of software called Pharos, which can do this automatically. So it listens to the beacon frequency you're tuned to, and it will even, if you've got cat control, it will change the frequency on the rig to the next one up, because they transmit on 20 meters, then they go to 17, then they go to, where they go? Oh, there we go. That's the one. That's it. They go up to 17, then 15, then 12, and then 10, and they're excellent. And Pharos automatically listens for them and plots the signal strength of the beacons. I haven't used it much recently. I know that Gwyn Williams in G4FKH in the UK is starting to do some work on this now. The reason I haven't is because with this low sunspot numbers, there's been very little audible. I mean, if you listen on 14.1 now, you probably only hear OH2B or maybe RR90 or CS3B, but very little else. But as sunspot numbers crank up, then you should be able to hear, far more beacons. It'd be nice to hear W6WX. I think it's a W6WX, the Californian one again.
Yes,
I haven't heard that. I haven't heard that for some time.
Just a little side note on the 4UI 1UN. They've been on 60 meters in the evening here in the U.S. You might want to see if you guys can hear them. They've been doing it for the last week. They've been on 60 at about 20 Zulu, I think it is, maybe a little bit later.
Okay, that's good.
Next question is from Peter, Golf Whiskey 4, Golf Charlie Bravo. Which program would you suggest is best for local, in my case, inter-G skip propagation predictions?
I don't think there's a program that I'd recommend, but I would say keep an eye on PredTest. So the NVIS, on the NVIS tab on not PredTest, PropQuest. Sorry, it's a shame that the sites all sound very similar, but PropQuest, that's Jim G3YLA's program, and that looks at the critical frequency calculations as determined by the digisons, and that will show you any one time the real life NVIS maximum usable frequency, basically. So if you're trying to work out what frequency to use, that's probably the best program to use.
Thank you. Our next question is from Bruce, G4 Kilo Zulu Tango. Is one-way propagation possible? Several people at our local club have reported hearing stations, but are not able to contact them.
Yes, it is. I think we've all had a case of, you know, you can hear stations and they won't come back to you. I usually put it down to either they're a little bit on the deaf side or they've got noisy stations. But yes, I think it must be, because there's so many reports of one-way propagation. I definitely think that it definitely happens. How we can explain it is not quite so simple. But I think, what do you think anyway? There's so many examples of it. I think it must happen.
Well, I think the one thing that's really a good part of it is sometimes the noise floor is so different at the different ends of the signal path that we're not taking that into consideration when we're talking about the propagation. So that I think that's what sets up a lot of these phenomena that we think are one-way propagation, is just actually an extremely high noise floor at one end to the other.
Yeah. I think it's just one of those things with radio that you just have to live with. But I think we've all been in contests, for example, when, you know, stations 10 dB over 9 and they just cannot hear you, and it really drives you mad. Other stations, you know, you go straight through and you think, well, what is it? Is it noise floor? Have they got such bad receivers? No, I think you're right. I think it's noise floor. I think high noise floor is probably the one thing that's hit radio hams more than anything. I mean, especially in the UK, and it's probably in the US as well. And it's something that is a problem, and it's something that we don't really get to grips with, perhaps. It's okay having I mean, I think with most of the propagation programs, you specify your noise floor by saying I'm in a rural community, or I'm in an urban community, whatever, but you may have to crank that up a little bit and you know, to get the right signal to noise ratio to reflect your noise floor that you've got in your particular location. It is a problem, I think.
Our next question is from Dieter, F6 Golf November Kilo. On HF bands, is it interesting to have cross dipoles to listen to ordinary and extraordinary waves?
Okay, interesting. There's a lot of work being done on this. Basically, any radio wave that enters the ionosphere comes back as a circular polarized wave. And as to how circular polarized it is, it depends on, but the split causes this circular polarization. So when the wave, you can send a linear polarized wave up, and what comes down is a circular polarized wave. Now, is that left-hand circular? Is it right-hand circular? Is it planar? It will depend, and it will change in real time, because the ionosphere is not a fixed entity. So it is absolutely a good idea to have cross dipoles. But I think if you're going to have cross dipoles on HF, you need to be able to phase one against the other, so you can go left hand or right hand. And you'll usually find that the signal is stronger on one way or the other. But within a second or two, it could change. This has actually prompted a PhD over here. We had a meeting. It was a propagation studies meeting. We were discussing this very thing. And so if you send a radio wave up to the ionosphere, what does it come down as? We said, well, we all know it comes back as circular polarized. I said, well, yes, but does it? And this prompted a PhD that Chris Deacon, G4IFX, is doing, and it's turned out to be really, really interesting as to what comes back off the ionosphere. And it's not as clear cut as you would think, but it can go left hand, it can go right hand, it may be planar, and it can change in a second. So it's I think the best option, if you've got the space to do it, cross dipoles, but the ability to phase them left or right, or go from one to the other is vital.
Our next question is a comment from Jim Larson, AL7FS. One-way propagation is observed here in Anchorage, Alaska. Might it be one-way latitude-based? I think maybe if you could expand a little bit on the higher latitude propagations, might be very interesting for people.
Yeah, I hope I could. Yeah, I mean, latitude makes a big difference, especially up in Alaska, where you're almost under the auroral zone, I'm guessing. And the propagation up there is totally different to what it is down here. Likewise, over the equator, it's all to do with the geomagnetic effects on Earth. And up in Alaska, if you're sitting under the auroral zone, it's going to be a lot noisier. If you've got a high K index, it's going to cause more problems for you as well. And also the way the radio waves have to go, and they also get bent and distorted as well as they go through the ionosphere. So yeah, I think it does make a big difference as to where you are in the world. Likewise, if you're on the equator, the D-layer absorption near the equator is enormous during when the sun is up, and you may find that on the equator that you cannot work anything on HF, around midday. And it's only at night time that things really calm down. I gave a talk once to a group in Norway, and they were basically saying that when there's an aurora, that's it, forget it. You're not going to get out anywhere, which is something we don't really have to think about too much.
Well, one comment from SM5LWC. He measured the noise floor in Stockholm suburb in 1984 with an S2. In 2010, in the same location, he measures an S9 now. So yeah, he's had a significant hindrance to his propagation with his increased noise floor there in Stockholm.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. And thank you all for attending today. Again, we have the links posted, and I think, Steve, is your talk going to be available afterward for the links to click in it?
I think so, yeah. I'm more than happy for it to be made available, yeah.
Okay, well, very good, and thank you very much, and hope to hear you all on the air. We'll go ahead and stop the recording.
Okay, thank you.